Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. Few things to cover here, nothing too big. First up is that it looks like the Legend of Korra Funko Pops are beginning to see their release. Someone in Australia has received 3 of the 4 standard Funkos, and as they say in their posts there, the Asami and the other Korra, the exclusive Korra, are still on pre-order for them. So that was kind of weird just to see that they didn't ship the Asami out just to make it like 4. So that's a little bit weird. Like, I get the exclusive being treated differently than the other 4, but Asami being excluded is a little odd. But as we see here, the exclusive is also showing up overseas as well. So this is the special edition, kind of like Book 2 Avatar State Korra with the Rava symbol. And this was the one, like, there was a little bit of confusion after the fact about, like, so is there going to be a chase version of this or not? And this confirms to us that yes, there is going to be a chase version of this. So as you can see here from the packaging, they both look pretty much the same, but clearly one has like a glow-in-the-dark white paint for the eyes and maybe the Rava symbol, and the other one doesn't. So it looks like they're going to be relatively similar, so I don't think there'll be too much of an issue over like if you can't get the chase one or if you can. But again, we'll have to see how good the glow-in-the-dark one actually looks. Like, if the Rava also is glow-in-the-dark and it looks good, there could be a big demand for getting the glow-in-the-dark one, but we still have to wait and see on that. But yeah, the Funko's starting to show up. There's never really a release date for these. It's more of a just general release window. So June for most places seems to be the release window for these, but they've started to show up here kind of end of May. So yeah, over the next, I suppose, month, 2 months, these will start to show up, I suppose. More places will start to ship them out. I have pre-ordered all 5 of these, so the 4 standard Funkos plus this exclusive one. So again, we'll see which one I get. I think I have a chance to get the glow-in-the-dark one, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I will be reviewing all of these when they arrive, so look out on my channel and like my social medias and stuff like that too. And I'll let you guys know when they arrive, so you can expect some videos on these. Next up, last piece of news is this. Avatar The Last Airbender Imbalance Library Edition ends up now being the next book that is to be released after a lot of the other delays and stuff like that. This is actually the next book due out. So June 16, 2020 is the regular bookstore release date. With comic book stores in sort of the position that they're in right now, I think Diamond has just started to get back to shipping out comics weekly. We'll see how it affects this book. I guess that would make June 3rd the comic book store release date. So if your comic book store is open and stuff like that, you might be able to get this book a little earlier. But if you've ordered online, in or around June 16th is when this book is going to be released. So this is the library edition. It's the collected edition of Imbalance. It's going to contain Imbalance Part 1, 2, and 3 in a hardcover book. Slightly bigger art. It's going to have annotations plus some art extras at the back. Your kind of typical thing, what you expect from all of the other Avatar library editions. But we have a look inside, as you can see here. So if we open that up, we have our preview pages for the library edition. And the main reason I'm covering this is because it shows us some of the annotations. So if we go past the cover here, we can see some of the sort of credits pages. Apologies I can't make this any bigger. Whatever way the viewer is done here, it's kind of locked in at the specific size. I can't really find any way to adjust it. But anyway, you can see all the credits pages here with the little pieces of art that they choose to kind of feature in all of these pages. It's pretty nice. There is the clean cover for Imbalance Part 1. There's the last kind of element symbol page before we get into the comic itself. And then from here on out, we get the first 10 pages of Imbalance Part 1. So the first 10 pages that could have annotations on them. And of those 10 pages, we get annotations on 4 of the pages. So 4 out of 10 seems fairly okay, except when you realize that when you add up a lot of this stuff, none of the comics have had annotations on more than like 30% of their pages. I think each of the library editions has about 216 pages of actual comic, so pages that can have annotations. And from my count, the North and South Library Edition was the highest one. It had, I think, 65 pages with annotation, which still obviously like isn't 33%. It's still not a third of the pages, which is pretty bad. And the Rift, I think, was all the way down at about 36 pages with annotations, which is barely any. So it's been very hit and miss with these annotations, more on the miss side of things. I know some people like them. I personally find a lot of it to be just sort of fairly like standard, like pointing out the obvious style stuff, nothing particularly insightful. And we'll go through that here in these opening pages. But I don't think this necessarily presents a great idea. I think it's still going to be around the standard amount of annotations in this book. Probably in or around somewhere between like 50 and like 65 pages will have annotations. I hope that's a good estimate, because if there's less, obviously that's going to be a pretty bad mark against the book, but we'll see what happens. So here's the first page. The first page has a pretty large annotation here from Peter Wortman. Avatar was a huge influence on me. The show was coming out roughly around the same time I was in college, and basically set the standard for what I appreciate in good storytelling. Drawing this first page was a bit surreal and intimidating, especially coming on the heels of Gene Yang and Gurihiru's long run on the comic. No easing into things either. Not only was I immediately drawing every major character from the show, I had to figure out how all of them acted on the fly. I quickly discovered that Sokka is extremely fun to draw. So that's a nice kind of start, him acknowledging the previous creative team and that it was a kind of big obstacle for him kind of coming in after like 5 books with the same creative team for him to have to take over the art. That's nice to hear. And just, yeah, immediately, like the first page, he has to draw like most of the team. So that's a nice little moment. No annotations on the second page, but we do get Faith Erin Hicks's first annotation on the third page. She says, here's the beginnings of what would eventually become Republic City. Much of the story of Imbalance was inspired by Season 1 of Legend of Korra. I thought a lot about the challenges going from a world divided between elements to a multicultural city where different benders live side by side. Peter Wortman also has an annotation here and says, a lot of this comic was looking at reference images from Korra and trying to figure out how things looked a generation or so earlier. So that's pretty standard. Like, I don't think that's particularly insightful from the writer, her first kind of comment here, to say that, oh look, Cranefish Town becomes Republic City. That's the point of the book. That's the big thing in this book. So I don't think she's saying anything particularly interesting there, unfortunately. Like, I can appreciate what she's trying to get at, of just like, yeah, this is one of these transition points. But we've already seen that already in the comics with the Promise and so on. This is just continuing that. We do have annotations on the next page as well. Faith Erin Hicks says, Peter did an amazing job bringing this young, sprawling, messy city to life. It feels lived in and full of stories. Just praising the artist. That's a lot of what we saw from like Gene Yang's comments in all of his library editions, was a lot of just, you know, every so often filling in some of the annotation page count with Gurihiru do a good job here, so nothing particularly insightful. And Peter Wortman, this city took forever to draw. I'm still pretty happy with how Cranefish Town looks. I wanted it to feel very slapped together, a place that grew far too quickly without much regard for the people living in it. I doubt anyone was paying too much attention to building codes. So, you know, that's somewhat interesting, of just like, yeah, it's a complicated drawing here of this town, especially in some of these shots here, and that's the look he was going for, and it fits in with the story. His next annotation is massive amounts of rooftops will be a thing in this story. That's something Faith and I have in common, sticking lots of rooftops in our comics. Now, that's obviously referring to this comic has a lot of rooftops and so on. I think it's also referring to Faith Erin Hicks's last original graphic novel, the Nameless City trilogy. Sorry, I nearly forgot the name there for a second. It also involves a lot of like characters running along rooftops, and I think one of Peter Wortman's last books as well was sort of like that as well. So, you know, a lot of rooftop stuff. Nice reference there, but definitely like from the first couple of annotations, it feels like Peter Wortman's sort of comments on his art and what was difficult to draw or not is much more interesting than kind of what Faye there and Hicks had to say. Which I felt was always the problem with like the annotations from the other books as well, of like you wished Jin Yang would go just a little bit more in depth in terms of what is the writing intent behind this comic, and that even if the comic didn't like do it all for you, that just some of the comments from the writer would get across some of those ideas they were going for, but maybe the comic didn't present as clearly as maybe you wished. That's what I'm hoping to get from annotations from the rest of this book, is kind of a little bit of a fill in the blanks. Why was this book, you know, not as sort of ambitious in a way as some of the other books? Why did this one not hit as hard for me as the other comics? Does she say something about that as we go through it? Does she tease anything about what's next? That's kind of what I want to hear from this. Not necessarily her just being like, Peter Wortman did a good job here, because that, like, anyone can say that. Like, if I was doing annotations for this book, that's the sort of comment you'd expect like me to say about kind of some of the art as well. So that's just one of those things, is like, you know, 4 annotations in and it covers 10 pages. That's 6 blank pages just in the early section of the book, when there's actually still a lot to talk about. It doesn't look that great, obviously, and you guys know I've been pretty consistent on this pretty much since the Promise Library Edition of I'm not the biggest fan of the annotations. I'd much prefer the authors to just have a section in the back of the book where they can just talk about it in text, have a page to discuss. This is my thoughts on the art. Here's like 2 pages of text, me writing about doing the art on the book. Here's 2 pages of text, Faith Erin Hicks, about the writing intent behind this book, rather than sort of spreading out sort of scattered comments throughout the book and all of the pages having this border, and you get completely blank pages like this where there's nothing said on it, and it goes like on for pages at a time, where there's 4 pages, 5 pages in a row at the end of this preview. No annotations, even though there's stuff going on the pages that you'd maybe like a comment or 2 on, of just like, oh look, Toph and her father again, like reference the Rift or something like that. None of that going on here, like reference what's going on at this guy's stall or anything like that. No, just no comments here about the intent of like, this is what we wanted to get across in this scene or anything like that. It's definitely frustrating, and it's one of those things where like I rarely actually go back to the library editions. When I want to look something up from one of the comics, I usually grab my individual parts. I think when the omnibus editions come out, those are the books I'll be grabbing, not the library editions, because honestly the borders, the annotations are kind of almost distracting when you're going through the book more than anything. I don't think they do enough to kind of justify their place in the book, given what they overall take away, and that we could have bigger art if they didn't have to make the space for it and so on. I think things could be better if they switched up the format. I get they want to keep the same size of book so that the Avatar hardcovers don't look different, but I think there's a way to do that without having such a giant border. Yeah, they're my thoughts on everything that's happened recently in the news. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts on the fact that the Korra Funko Pops are finally making their way out and they're reaching their release dates? And also about the first preview pages from the Imbalance Library Edition. What are your thoughts on the annotations and what you maybe expect from them as we get the full book? But yeah, in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. That's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.